Accessible web.
It's not operable using keyboard. I can't tab to it. Once I tab down, it jumps over it. So that is something that we will have to document.
For our audit, we're not going to do a full-blown audit. Those usually take 2.5, 3 hours per like screen. So what we're going to look at is particular components. And then we have a specific set of tests that were predetermined that are going to be really easy to replicate on your end as well. For those that aren't familiar with our product, Ramp is set up as a place to deliver automated remediation tasks, which could be found via running our scanner. We use AxeCore for our scanner and create tasks, but also if you receive a manual audit, it's a really good way to organize, or you're doing your own manual audit, it's a good way to organize tasks. But really the bread and butter of Ramp is the ongoing monitoring of your platform. It's a really good way to let you know that you've implemented new components that have accessibility failures, um, or the opposite, and things are great. You've implemented good stuff, and the scanner's not picking up on anything because you've done a good job. Our whole purpose in this is progress over perfection. So we're just helping people identify areas where there's room for improvement. I'll hand it off to you, Mark.
Thank you. Alrighty, so we're gonna take a look at the nav here with these collapsing and expanding components. So yeah, this first thing I'm gonna be doing is just looking at these and then just tabbing through as you saw me do. Um, and then we can run the auto scan. But again, I don't think anything was catching any flaws here. So this would be okay. And I can check this again later on, but I think that should be fine. Nothing was popping out as strange to me or inconsistent. And I can check this by going to inspector as well. And everything here looks pretty safe. But let me close this up so you can see that. Okay, so for the first test, we're going to go to keyboard tab navigation here. And essentially what we're going to do is just tab through and check to make sure everything inside the components here or inside the nav here works and that it is operable using keyboard alone. These all get focus indicators, which is good. Oh, hello. Okay. And I'm using my arrow keys to just maneuver here and see if I can get into that section of camping there. And my tab key won't go. I'm just going to check if it's the same for everything here as well, for the things to do about us as well. And this looks to be the same. Okay. Let me just check if I can activate this content. It looks like everything in the second and third panels here are not operable using keyboard alone. So that's something I would indicate in my test here. So if we go to add to failures, we type in here expose content, visits. Again, in the chat, please let me know if you need me to clarify anything that I'm doing, just that you're also following along clearly. But essentially what I'm filling here for is all the content here in the camping, day use, things to do, this section of content here, as well as the about us section of content aren't operable using keyboard alone. So I'm going to document that and let the client know that this content needs to be operable using keyboard. And then in the remediation section here, we give the client a fix on how to resolve that issue as well. The next thing we're looking at is going to be a test for keyboard traps. As you can see, there were no keyboard traps present, and I know that because I was able to escape this content, I can collapse and open it. So there's no issues there. And that effectively works for our test for on focus, because when I tab on focus, there's no change of context. everything is still the same here. I'm not opening a new window or moving focus elsewhere that I'm not known to. Same with input. There's nothing changing on input here. I'm going to the correct page when I'm clicking on the link, and that's being notified of that as well. So that's okay. No keyboard shortcuts. I can do this by just pressing all the keys on my keyboard, and nothing is happening there. And then there are also no specific timing for individual keystrokes. So as we saw, the next test we saw is going to be for visible focus state. And you can see there's that nice bright blue border there, letting us know where we are on the page. So that's perfect. We'd love to see that. So we can mark that as complete. For focus not obscured, we're looking to see if we are receiving focus, that component shouldn't be hidden. And that component should be visible. Oops. But you can see all the components are visible. There's no hidden components here that we're not unaware of that is receiving focus. So that is a-okay. So we can also mark this as complete. The next thing we'll be looking for, testing for, is going to be in the heading section. The only thing that was flagging for headings that could have been headings were these park find, like text in here. I was worried there's going to be image of text, but they are regular text, which is good. Um, but I wouldn't consider these headings. I think this is just specifically for the camping section. Hmm. So we can mark that as not applicable here. The big one is going to be for label. So this is an important one. Typically, you start from the top of these tests here and move down, but I'm going to start with label and name. And essentially this test, what we're looking for is that the labels we're seeing visibly is exactly the same labels that is being communicated programmatically to the accessibility tree. So we can do this using our tool here. So we're going to take out the hidden elements. And we're going to go to see if the names are the same. And we can do this by checking element here so we can see if the tool is highlighting the visit button. And we can see here the accessible name for visit is the exact same, which is perfect. We can do the same for things to do, about us, and shop. That is awesome. Now the tricky one is going to be for here because it looks like this might freeze. Yep. So this will break when this happens, but there is a little trick that the devs taught me. So if we go into inspector here, we go into this button, we can break on the subtree and the attribute modifications, and then this should allow us to freeze it here. And now we can check for accessibility names here, which is really cool. So we can check the labels here since it's frozen right now. And you can see publications, maps, and map guides has the correct label that matches, which is perfect. The same goes for other state parks and lands, operating schedules. You can also see that it has the same name and has the correct role, which is great. So we don't have to make a failure for having an incorrect role. And I'm going to check to see if the second column has the same as well. And this seems to be true. So this making reservations is the same. The same here as well. And you may have caught, for those who are looking at the elements here, that it has an unordered list. This is okay. Having a group of links is fine. even though it's held within the list, um, from W3C, um, lists are like pretty vague and they can hold different types of content. And holding links in a group of links is pretty common. So this is would not be considered a failure. This is okay. Just making sure that all these are correct. And then we'll move on to the next few, but I have a good feeling that everything should be okay. Weddings, shelters looks good. Perfect, perfect. And these all look okay. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing for this section quickly. Okay. Again, you can see all the names there look the same, which is really good. So we will complete the task there. Um, there are no instructions here that need to be related to any of these components, so we can mark this test as complete. But if there are instructions, for example, for a form field, telling a user that you have to have certain amount of letters, certain amount of numbers in your password, then those instructions should be related to that input form field. So we're going to mark that as not applicable. Um, label text, accessible names were all descriptive enough for each of these components and these links, so we can mark this as complete. And then as you saw, for the labels, the visible labels match the accessible names, and they all have labels. Nothing was missing, so we can mark this test as complete as well. Going through the state and purpose section, majority of these tests apply to form fields, and sometimes select components, some buttons as well, if they're disabled. But essentially what you're looking for is if buttons are disabled or required or read only, they should be communicating that same information in the accessibility tree. However, this is not the case for these navigation buttons and links, so we can mark these tests as not applicable. The same goes for autocomplete. Again, these aren't form fields, so we wouldn't want to have an autocomplete attribute placed on a button. That wouldn't make sense. So we're going to mark that as not applicable. For the link purpose test here, what we're looking for is ensuring that um, the link names make sense regardless of the information or without having a text surrounding it. So you can see here the link text describes its purpose. Without surrounding text, which is good. And that should be um, all good for all of these as well. Because when you click winter activities, you're going to be set to winter activities page, which is perfect. Nothing there is not out of the norm. And then for the native widgets link function test here, um, we are just going to be looking that the correct rule is present for these links. If it's not, then we want to change that rule to a native element. So all the elements here that were mentioned, we saw had an anchor element within here, and then you can see the shop link here, which is the correct role. So that is okay. And I can test this as well. Just going to click the shop link. It will take us to the shop Vermont State Parks page. And then just going to the visit page here, all these do the correct role. So those do not need to be changed to a different role. When we click into here as well, you can see the failure details. If an anchor element is coded to function as something other than a link, then it should have that correct role. But that is not the case here, so this is okay.
Hey, Mark, real quick.
Yep.
We have a question here, and it's a really good one. Do
Yep.
you mind using the pause component for the background video?
Oh, yes. My
Awesome.
apologies.
No,
Yep.
you're good. Thank you so much.
Alrighty. So now we are on name role value. Um, so the same test we saw here for links, for link function role, this is for pertinent to links. The same is going to be present for us for buttons here as well. So when there's a button, that doesn't function as a button and functions more appropriately as a link, we want that to be swapped to that element as well. But in this case, again, these components are functioning as buttons, so that is a-okay. We're going to keep those the same. And this is probably the hardest part for a lot of people who are doing manual auditing who are just learning it, because a lot of this has to do with custom widgets. So again, these three buttons here are custom widgets. Typically, a regular button would not perform these actions without having additional roles or communicating those additional roles. So for example, a search button, you're just triggering that action. For this instance, I know these function as disclosure buttons because they are collapsing and expanding content. And we're going to test to see if if they're correctly coded by going into our guide here, and we're going to click on disclosure button. And you can see here, disclosure buttons reveal content and collapse content once they're activated. So what we're going to do here is look into our remediation recommendation section, and we're just going to compare what we see versus what is present in the code here. Again, this is what we think, based with W3, is the correct implementation of this. Um, so if we go into inspector here, we're just going to have the side by side open, and we're going to look at what is the recommended design pattern and to see if it's the exact same as what we see here, to make sure everything looks good. So we can see here it has the button elements. Hit a button element is present here as well, so that is good. We want to make sure that it has a name for this component. If we look here, it has visit, which is awesome. So it has a name present, so that's all good. The next thing we want to look for is aria expanded. And we can see here aria expanded equals false is present. When it's active, it changes to true. Let me pause the debugger. Um, so that is all good. Let me turn off the break too, actually. So you can see it changes to true when it is expanding content and false when content is collapsed, which is great. Again, the other thing that is important too is that the name does not change once the content is expanded or collapsed. Sometimes names will change. So for example, it could be visit collapse when the content is exposed, or visit expanded when the content is or exposed or collapsed. Um, so that's good. The name is not changing. We have the optional element or attribute of ARIA controls. We can see that here, and the ID is present up here for the div. So essentially what ARIA controls does, simply it just tells assistive technologies which element on a web page is being changed or toggled by a specific button or control. And you can see here this visits button has ARIA controls for this div, and the ID is down here for that. So it's controlling that set of content there, and that is okay. And the last thing we're going to see is to make sure that the button can be operated with the space bar and the enter button. And I'm doing that for both. So that is perfect. And then the same goes for all these components as well. I would do the same checks for all of these. And you can see here it has the exact same ARIA expanded and ARIA controls. So everything there looks good, and the name is present as well. So no failures have to be added for this here. But typically what we'll see for components that function like this, sometimes they don't have the button role, but they have an ARIA expanded, so that component would have to have the button role. Sometimes these components function as disclosures, and I know that, but if I go and check, sometimes that our expanded rule won't be present. So just indicating to the client that that button needs to have that appropriate state to indicate to the accessibility tree that this component is expanding and collapsing. Going into adaptable here, this has to do with the way the page looks at different viewports. So for this first test, the only thing we're testing here is that it can be swapped to two different portrait modes. So we're going to check landscape from portrait mode to landscape mode. So we could do this by going to inspector, and we're going to activate the emulator here and then rotate it. And the only thing we're looking for is if it can go landscape to portrait. That's the only check we're checking for this test here. And since it does that, we can mark that as complete. The next test we're going to do is for resized text. For resized text, we just want to ensure that there's no loss of content or functionality at 200% zoom. I'm going to do that same test. I'm just going to use our reflow test here to set our viewport to this size here. And then I can hit a double whammy with going to 400 and 200% zoom. So again, we're just making sure we're keeping an eye on this content here for the navigation and seeing what happens once it does, if it does change when the viewport size is zoomed to a different size. So you can see it's already changed. So we're going to look to see where that goes. It looks like it's going to be in the menu. Yeah. So the menu section here is not the prettiest, but this can be adjusted to fit the appropriate report and make sure everybody can see it. But it looks like the view button is there. Let's see if we can access the buttons here. Okay. So we can still access that content, but it's not visible to us, right? So we're missing the camp and another one, I think. There's two other ones that we saw there. Camp and day use. That is no longer present. And we can only see Park Finder. Unless we do the side scrolling here. There it is. So now we can see it. But it's still not operable using keyboard. That was already noted previously, so that's okay. So once that gets adjusted, hopefully those can be operable using keyboard alone. I'm going to check to make sure these are the same, so these can all be operated. And I'm assuming the same is present for things to do where you have to side scroll to get across here. And the same is going to be for About Us. So all this content is still present. It just requires users to side scroll to get to that content. And it all is still operable. So yeah, I was going to say the other important thing to note is for resized text, there is no indication that it fails for side scrolling. However, for reflow, that is a failure. That side scrolling is not or is required to view content. So that is something we might have to document for 400% zoom, and I know that now because we checked it for 200, and it's going to be the same for this as well. If not, it might be a bit harder to view. Oh, unless it changed. It looks like it did. But that content still isn't operable using keyboard alone. So we can still access this content here, but once it gets to the camp content, it's not operable using keyboard. I can't tab to it. Once I tab down, it jumps over it. So that is something that we will have to document for 400% zoom. And I would just do this by saying the same, zoom. Photos menu. Um, I would say that the camping and the day use sections are not operable using keyboard alone. I would also add in additional success criteria here to fail it. I would fail it with 131 to start. Sorry, yes, with the 222, so that keyboard user or the client knows that it also is not operable. Add to the certain viewport as well. There's no input modalities here, so this is okay. But the last one would be contrast, but the contrast I can tell here is all good and the it all reaches the appropriate one. Yeah. So the easiest thing to tell for contrast for me, just going through a lot of pages is just checking the lightness versus the darkness of the text. You can tell here the dark green and the light white. Typically darker colors or lighter colors on a darker background will always do better. And we can test this quickly by using inspector here again. And you can check here to see the color codes here as well, and you can see the contrast for accessibility. But again, sometimes that doesn't always work, so we want to use our contrast checker. And you can see here if we zoom into text, we can click onto the color and get the darkest possible color here. And then we can see that dark green is reaching a 14.6. So that will pass. And then again, nothing happens on hover. And after tabbing through, we have the light blue visual indication of focus here on the white background, which hopefully reaches the 3:1. We can check that quickly by going to the buttons here. And then just hopefully this will work. We're going to go to hover and we're going to force focus and make sure we can get that dark blue. There we go. The light blue there. And we'll get this here. And it reaches the 3:1 there.
Perfect.